Morning. Hope everybody's doing okay on this Wednesday morning. Let's see, we're at May 20th. Yes, this is a recording from Tuesday. That's why you see me in the same clothes as yesterday's video. But today we're going to talk about the Vietnam War. Vietnam is one of my favorite topics to teach, so I'm bummed out we're not in class to cover that. But I think Vietnam, out of all the wars, well, I mean, you've got Iraq and Afghanistan the last 18 years, but Vietnam before that is the one that it resonates mostly probably with your grandparents' generation. If you've got a grandparent or a great uncle that was in Vietnam, it's worth it now. They may not want to talk about it, but it's also worth it to ask them about it and see if they'll give you any kind of story with it. All right, something very cool for you to do while you're at home under quarantine. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. At the top of your document, there should be a map of Southeast Asia, a very colorful one, right? And I want you to find Vietnam on the map, right? And then I want you to tell me which countries does it share a border with on the north side, in the northern part of its border, all right? This is what makes the Vietnam War so dangerous. This is what makes it a big yellow country at the very top of the map. I'm throwing out every possible hint I can for you. All right? So as soon as you know that, we'll be able to understand why the Vietnam War was so dangerous. Who was Ho Chi Minh? Ho Chi Minh, H-O, yes, Ho, Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was the leader of the Communist Party in North Vietnam. The Vietnam War is very much could be considered Korean War Part 2, right? Same storyline, same kind of geography. The North Vietnamese, I guess you can call it the Viet Cong, is what it was called, and Ho Chi Minh, they wanted to make South Vietnam become communist, right? The South Vietnamese didn't want that. So who's supposed to show up? Per the Truman Doctrine, guess who's showing up? Here come the Americans. The Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. So here come the Americans. Right around 1964 is where we see the first troops sent in. This is in President Lyndon Johnson's first full year in office. It's also an election year. So anytime, it's always crazy how war and elections or re-elections are tied together. President Johnson knows if he wants to get reelected, he basically gets a tryout after Kennedy is killed, and he's in office for less than a year, and then he gets reelected. And during that time, he chooses to send troops into Vietnam. How did the U.S. respond to Ho Chi Minh's election in North Vietnam? Sending troops. That's simple. Sending troops. We're going in. These troops were considered to be advisors, and the idea was to go into Vietnam and train the South Vietnamese army against the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese. Guerrilla warfare, number 4. What is guerrilla warfare? Guerrilla warfare is what the Viet Cong used to fight our soldiers and the South Vietnamese, and they were good at it. And we'll get further into later on why the Vietnam War was so dangerous for our soldiers. But the Viet Cong were literally coming up from the ground and shooting at our troops. I mean, like a video game. I'm not kidding. Yeah, this really happened. They had a tunnel system dug in the ground, and they would come up out and shoot at us and then go back down. It's crazy how they were able to. I don't know if there's ever been a better home field advantage in a war. I really believe that. Viet Cong, that was the North Vietnamese army, and they were the enemy. They also, our soldiers used the code word Charlie. We're looking for Charlie. That's what they meant by that. If you ever watch Forrest Gump, I think you hear that term used quite a bit by Lieutenant Dan. So let's go ahead and jump to number 6. Why did President Johnson choose to send troops to Vietnam when President Kennedy opted not to? Remember the containment idea? It's all about containing the communism. It's kind of like cancer. The chemotherapy is designed to contain it. The Truman Doctrine was there to contain communism. The Americans felt like they had a commitment to stopping the spread of it throughout the world. And President Johnson apparently agreed. There's also this term called the domino theory. Right now, you should be looking at an image, I guess a chart, graphic on the document, the domino theory, and it shows a set of dominoes with a different country's name on them. And you've got Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and India. The Americans, we didn't want those areas to become communist. We still felt like we had business to do with those countries. So that's the domino theory. Once one country becomes communist, all the ones around it are going to become communist. And last question for today. Which of the following was not a factor leading to the U.S. involvement in Vietnam? The answer on that one is going to be corruption by South Vietnamese leaders. The South Vietnamese were not corrupt. It was the North Vietnamese. Now, they probably accused the South Vietnamese of being corrupt, which, again, anytime you hear a politician say, that country's corrupt, guess what? They're corrupt too. Politics is very much a game of don't throw stones if you live in a glass house. It's also it's crazy how, especially here in 2020, how politics becomes a game of which voting base has the shorter term memory. Because as soon as they accuse that candidate of doing something, it's almost like they've chosen to forget. They've chosen to get my words mixed up. They have chosen to forget that their candidate, their politician that they're rooting for, was just guilty of the same thing not too long before that. It's funny how that works. And the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese had that going on. We may call the North Vietnamese corrupt, but the South, I'm sure, had their issues as well, and that's why the North went communist. So, all right, tomorrow we'll get into the Vietnam draft. I think that'll be a heavy discussion, and I can't wait to talk about that actually. So, all right, I'm going to let you guys go and have an awesome, awesome, awesome Wednesday.